Just 20 years of age, you telling me you felt no pressure out there at all?
Like I always say, age is only a number.
Gets better and better for Danny Cipriani. First test match start, 18 points, impeccable.
Danny Cipriani, young man, take a bow. He is the Messiah! My word!
Danny Cipriani. Where do you start with a man like Danny Cipriani? One of the most talked about, controversial, opinion-splitting and talented players to ever come through the ranks of English rugby. I guess the only place I can start is the beginning. Daniel Jerome Cipriani was born in Roehampton, London on the 2nd of November in 1987. He was an only child born to a Caribbean father and an English mother. They met when his mother was on holiday in Trinidad, and after that, Jay Cipriani came over to London to be with his mother. Around 2 years after that, young Danny was born. Cipriani's parents split when he was very young, but he still managed to stay in contact with his father, Jay, who had returned to his native homeland of Trinidad and Tobago. But it was up to his mother, Anne Cipriani, to raise him by herself on a council estate in Putney. But she was a very driven woman who wanted the very best for her son. That drive saw her become one of the first ever female black cab drivers in London, so that she could put her son through school. When the two were interviewed and she was asked where this drive to have her son succeed came from, she responded with this: "I always knew at 16 nobody was going to do anything for me, and that's what's driven me all my life. When you hit a wall, you either fall over or you stand up and walk. And I have said that to Daniel since he was this high, and you were going to walk, Daniel." Her desire for this was so great that she even went as far as to take him out of his previous school, as they apparently only did 20 minutes of PE a week. She also spoke about not taking any holidays so that she could pay her son's tuition fees of around £3,000 a year to attend the Junior London Oratory School. This commitment to her son's future saw him excel at a number of other sports, including county level cricket for Berkshire and Oxfordshire, as well as being part of the Queen's Park Rangers Football Academy in his youth, with him especially excelling in rugby. Danny then began furthering his sporting and academic education attending Whitgift School, a school that to this day is renowned for its rugby programme, as it has housed other England rugby stars like Marlon Yard and his future Wasps teammate Elliot Daly. Going to Whitgift was another crucial step in Danny's rugby development. His first team coach at Whitgift, Adrian Norris, had this to say when asked about what Danny was like when he was younger. Right from an early age, he was ambitious enough to say that he was going to be England fly half. He had that inner belief, a statement that's been confirmed by Danny Cipriani in future interviews. His former coach then talked about his most vivid memory of him as a schoolboy, saying it was the first time he saw him play. He did about 5 things. The first thing was a spiral kick off his left foot the full length of the pitch, which was admirable at that particular time, but not outstanding. The next play he did the exact same thing off his right foot. The next 2 things were an accurate long miss pass, one off his left hand and one off his right hand. He had the tendency at that age to try absolutely anything, whereas most people would put a grubber kick through. He would put a grubber kick through with the outside of the wrong foot, that sort of stuff. He then went on to talk about the way Cipriani's thinking processes were often as wacky and creative as his on-field displays, and that often his thought processes were so far out and so advanced that his teammates would struggle to keep up. During his time at Whitgift, he joined the London Wasps Academy and captained the England under-16s team. There he met his future England coach Brian Ashton, who described him as a talent he had never seen before. While he was still at school, Warren Gatland gave him his debut for Wasps in the Power Gen Cup against Bristol in 2006, and continued to train with the team regularly, which must have been quite the experience for the schoolboy, as this was London Wasps at the peak of their powers, with people like Gatland, Edwards and McGeechan in charge, as well as there being multiple World Cup winners in the squad and many other serial winners in the team. Now, Sean Edwards, who I just mentioned, was a hero of rugby league, famously abrasive but a born winner who took part in 33 domestic finals and won every single one, and had started making a big impact in rugby union too. Now, he was one of Danny Cipriani's first real mentors in professional rugby, someone who would take a shine to the young man and took a real interest in him and his development not only as a player but also as a person, someone who would take the time to make sure Cipriani was doing extra work with him after training was finished, seeing the immense potential of the young man who seemingly had it all, even going as far as coming up with a unique technique for the young man to use in defence when tackling the big runners who are going to be coming at him. Cipriani has also spoken in interviews to this day about how his signature timing and selection of the right pass options was all down to the extras he used to do after training with Sean Edwards, honing his decision-making abilities. He was an integral part of him growing up, and their relationship would continue past rugby, as in the future Cipriani would be named godfather to one of Sean Edwards' daughters. Now, you may be wondering to yourself, why would a coach think that highly of a youngster, that he would dedicate such time, effort and emotion to him at such a young age? Well, one of the things that seemed to set Cipriani apart from other English fly halves was that despite his entertaining skillful abilities with the ball in hand or on his boot, he was also extremely quick, especially for a fly half. At the beginning of his first professional season, he had paid out of his own pocket to start training with 100-metre Olympic gold medal winning coach Margot Wells, who had nurtured and enhanced his initial athletic talents. So suddenly the English public were faced with the prospect of having a 18-year-old Carlos Spencer-esque fly half, whose English, and confirmed by Wasps fitness coach at the time to be the fastest player at the club, beating even England winger Paul Saki. This got people incredibly excited in an era where the idea of an English running 10 playing attractive, exciting rugby wasn't thought of as a possibility like the way it is today, as the person and style that every fly half in the country, young and old, was trying to emulate at the time was of Johnny Wilkinson, adding to the fact that England rugby had been talked of for the last 3 years as being in a period of transition, and we had this new golden boy who could make us young, fun and exciting again, and the hype train was ready to explode. The result of all these factors coming together at this time, coupled with Wasps pack led by the likes of Delalio and co, that was always going forward, allowed Cipriani the perfect platform to learn and perform, and well, the results speak for themselves.
Palmer hands it down to Red King. Cipriani, a couple of good handoffs there. Needs to find Voice on the outside. That's their 8th try. Voice coming up in the midfield now. Waldock, Cipriani's on the outside. And that rounds off a quite brilliant afternoon for London Wasps.
Read into Lucy. Maybe a bit of space. Oh, that's lovely from Cipriani. And again, and once more.
The action here, Delalio. That's a good pass out wide. It's Cipriani. And the youngster will get try number 10.
Delalio plays it short. And that is Cipriani. And that is the youngster doing wonders. That was super play from Cipriani. It was Delalio who set it up, but he'll say all afternoon, if you can run like that, youngster, I'll set it up all day.
It seemed like a match made in heaven for the young man, with the fly half being man of the match in his first start for the team in 2007 against Worcester, then playing a massive part in their season at such a young age, aiding the London Wasps in their European campaign by scoring crucial tries in their victory over Leinster in the quarter-finals and being given the opportunity to start at fly half against the Northampton Saints in the semi-final. Even though there was still a lot of room for the young man to grow, his incredible season was capped off by being the youngest ever player to start in a European Cup final, in a match that was full of physicality and drama, with Wasps using their clever trickery and explosive bench to catch the Tigers off guard. And with 10 minutes to go and a moment of visual foreshadowing, they allowed Alex King, the current Wasps fly half, to get a standing ovation from the crowd, allowing Cipriani to step into the role of fly half and close out the game, as he and his team won the biggest prize in European club rugby, which, considering he was just a teenager, it was even more of an incredible personal achievement. It was truly box office level stuff. Despite this whirlwind first season and Brian Ashton being head coach of England heading into the 2007 World Cup, he narrowly missed out on being part of England's 2007 World Cup squad, although he was among some of the youngsters who were training around the squad at the time. But for now at least, the World Cup was just out of reach. Coming into a new season, Cipriani hit the ground running with consecutive outstanding performances in a season that he would go on to be awarded the Young Player of the Year award for his outstanding displays on the field. Cipriani's teammate Delalio spoke in an interview at the beginning of 2008 talking about how he thought one of the most outstanding qualities that the young man had was that he had bulletproof self-belief. He also stated, "What I like about Danny is that he will do something on a rugby pitch and it won't always work, and everyone will shout at him and say, 'What the hell did you do that for?' And it will cost him. Then 10 minutes later he will try it again and it will work. He's not put off. His confidence is not damaged by that, and that shows as much as you need to know about him."
Cipriani, a little bit of floating magic. Cipriani scores for Wasps. Well, they've been on the back foot all game, but Danny Cipriani strikes half a chance and he took it so well.
There seems to be nothing on really. There are enough players there, and he simply jolts round, and then has strength, makes a line. And out of virtually no possession this half, Wasps find themselves in front. Hipkins, left trailing. Ball. They'll look to go again here because there's certainly none on this side. Cipriani inside waters. Cipriani calling for it back. Is it try number 3? Cipriani certainly deserved one. Oh, that's audacious. Absolutely audacious. Saki underneath the post. Young man, take a back.
Haskell goes for big first goal. It's the pace of Cipriani. He draws them, he waits. Inside ball. Now Fraser Waters is this forward. Cipriani. It's touch and go, but what a pluck from nowhere. Plucks it with a left arm, flips it with a right hand. Easy as you like. There was any doubt. You don't need to worry now. This is something akin to a rugby genius that is flowering. That is absolutely amazing play.
And and by the time the 2008 Six Nations came around, England coach Brian Ashton had seen enough to bring him into the squad. After making his debut coming off the bench against Wales, and despite an up-and-down performance against the Italians, Brian Ashton decided he was going to give this young man his first start and picked him to start at fullback against Scotland. But then Cipriani's astronomical upward trajectory hit a little bit of turbulence. Cipriani was pictured coming out of a nightclub on a Wednesday night at 11 PM, 3 days before the Scotland game. Cipriani insists to this day that he was attending a function and he was just dropping off some tickets. After this incident and the ensuing fallout, Brian Ashton decided to drop the young man from the squad to face Scotland. Danny Cipriani has reflected on this incident in multiple interviews. When speaking with BT Sport in an interview with Hugo Monye, he spoke about this event as a point where things started to go wrong for him, as well as in an interview with Will Greenwood for Sky Sports, where he spoke about how he still talks with Ashton about how this situation could have been handled and whether it was the right way to handle it. His tone in both interviews seemed to indicate a respect for Brian Ashton's decision and understanding of his fault in the matter, which contrasts heavily with his previous interviews about the matter a couple of years after the incident, where he spoke about his bewilderment at the fact that it was a big deal when he went out on a Wednesday night when he had a day off on the Thursday after, which at least to me shows that as he's gotten older, he has at the very least understood why a big deal was made out of the whole thing. But luckily for him, he didn't completely fall out with Ashton, and after England had played France and lost to Scotland, they had their final game of the Six Nations against Ireland at Twickenham. Ashton decided to give Cipriani another chance and selected him as the starting fly half, and in the biggest opportunity of his career, he didn't disappoint.
Speculative chip through, and it works for England. Meantime, a moment to remember perhaps for Danny Cipriani. His first test match point.
He's the key man for my money in this back row.
Clearance effected by Cipriani. It's beginning to work for him, isn't it? Slap back by Tom Croft. Cipriani again off that cultured left boot. Oh, goodness me. High, but nowhere near far enough. Oh, what a take from Cipriani. And this, with the new kid on the block, is to draw England level, and they are level.
And it's only a 3-point opportunity, but it's keeping the momentum going England's way.
Orchestrated by the young man making his first test match start. Again with the long restart. Happy for Cipriani to have the time to clear long. That's a wonderful kick. Wigglesworth to Flood. This is Cipriani playing it inside centre and still doing his stuff. Have England found a new hero in this first 40 minutes? His mum drives a black London cab and did to pay his way through school. She will be watching this and bubbling up inside. Her son is bossing the game.
Cipriani announced himself to the whole country as one of the premier young talents in the world in a performance that is still credited as one of the best performances by a fly half in an international game, and was quickly tipped by both people and pundits as the heir apparent to Johnny Wilkinson's throne. Before the game, the BBC broadcast caught Cipriani taking charge of a pre-game huddle. When asked about it after the game, he simply stated, "I couldn't go into playing fly half for England quietly, because it's just not me. I didn't want to go in there half-heartedly." This approach has both helped and hindered Cipriani's career, and this performance from him wasn't without its controversy, which unfortunately would become a pattern as time went on. As in his post-match interview, he did this.
And that goes down from 1 to 22. But today, our forwards 1 to 8, they deserve fucking man of the match because they were awesome. I can't believe I just saw on TV, sorry.
There wasn't too much controversy around the incident, and it didn't seem to affect Cipriani at all, as he was riding high and took his form from the international stage back to his club, and he and Wasps found themselves in the Guinness Premiership semi-final against Bath. But that's where disaster struck. During this game, Cipriani suffered a horrific ankle break, which brought his season to a premature end. When asked how it happened, he had this to say: "I was running along and my ankle spun. My whole body went numb before I did. So when I looked at my ankle, that's when I realised." My brain said, "That's your ankle. It's the wrong shape. This is how you're supposed to feel," and suddenly the pain kicked in. The doctor put my ankle back in place on the pitch. That was probably the most painful thing, because you could feel it twisting in the wrong shape. I was sat there, and obviously I was in tears, and it was just the fact that I was thinking, is this it? Is this me done? All those thoughts go through your head. Cipriani would have to watch Wasps go on to win the Premiership without him, but the injury would have him miss out on international opportunities as well. After the 2008 Six Nations, despite the final game against Ireland, Brian Ashton was replaced by Martin Johnson, who was set to take over in the autumn internationals, leaving the England summer tour as a chance for loads of players to put themselves in the shop window and really show what they're about before the new boss came in. But it was an opportunity that Danny would sadly miss out on. Unfortunately, it wasn't going to be the first bump in the road for Danny at the international stage. especially when it came to Martin Johnson. In a brighter note, in the summer between the next rugby season, Danny Cipriani started dating well-known model and actress Kelly Brook. And in doing so, Cipriani was not just a rugby player, but now he had entered the world of celebrity, despite dating one of the cheeky girls in the past. This was the moment that Cipriani really became one of rugby's few crossover household names. After such a serious injury, it was expected that he would return in the summer of next year, but that wasn't the case. Cipriani would work extremely hard to get back to full fitness and managed to come back in record time, just in time for the start of the 2008-2009 Guinness Premiership season. But he found it initially difficult, struggling to find a decent run of form, although there was always flashes of the young man's brilliance. People in the media began to question his commitment to rugby, despite the fact that he had worked extremely hard to get himself back in time for the season. There were claims that he was more interested in his newfound celebrity status than his rugby career. Another thing that wasn't helping Cipriani's slight dip in form was the fact that Wasps were beginning to decline from being one of the main superpowers in England, as a lot of their biggest stars had either retired or were reaching the end of their run. The club was in a period of transition, which couldn't have been the best environment to regain your form, and with team frustrations high, the famous coming together between himself and Josh Lucy occurred. There have been many variations of the story, some that include Cipriani telling the former British Army officer to shut up or be shut up, which is just delicious. But the version of the story that consistently pops up is the two backs were training. Cipriani accuses Josh Lucy of not pulling his weight. Lucy hits Cipriani with a swift punch to the face that floors the young English prodigy. Cipriani has spoken in interviews both about the incident as well as the way he can get during training. He states that he is a lot more analytical when he's actually playing in the match, but during training he can get very frustrated. In most interviews that he speaks about training, he always speaks about Sean Edwards telling him he needs to be constantly riding people and to always be on top of them, and that this particular incident was just one where things boiled over, which seemed to be true, as next week the pair seemed to have made up quite quickly. And with the games rapidly coming thick and fast for Cipriani, he would start to find his feet once more, and despite his initial purple patch, Martin Johnson selected him in his first England squad for the autumn internationals. But the first session in camp didn't get off on the right foot for Cipriani. Players seemed to turn their nose up at the fact that he showed up to Martin Johnson's first training camp in a Ferrari. Yes, really. So I'm going to read the whole quote as I remember reading this story in Lewis Moody's book. I am an open-minded guy, but it's fair to say that my first impression of Danny Cipriani wasn't a good one. He had already made his mark by being dropped by Brian Ashton before England's 2008 Calcutta Cup match with Scotland after being spotted at a nightclub before the game, then producing an impressive display at standoff against Ireland. The following season, Cipriani decided to turn up to Martin Johnson's first England camp in a Ferrari. Maybe there's a bit of old school about me, but when a young man comes into a new squad, I think he needs to keep his head down and get on with it. You stand out because you're a great player dedicated to training and playing. You don't stand out because you turn up in a Ferrari. Just before the next bit, the car was actually a gift from a friend for getting back from injury so quickly. It was a sort of incentive for him getting back so he could ride around in the Ferrari for a bit. Anyway, back to the book. To me, it was an insight into what made Danny tick. Everyone was talking him up as the next best thing, but the key word is next. I have absolutely no problem with whatever car you choose to drive, but to do this at 19 seemed to me to be starting off his relationship with Jono, who had taken charge of England after Ashton, on the wrong foot. If he knew anything about Jono at all, he'd have known the last thing he should have done is breeze into England camp with that car, which in my opinion is a hot load of bullshit. I understand what he means, but it's such a superficial thing to judge someone on, and I don't know what car specifically he wants anyone to show up in so that he feels better and more respected by the youngster. Sorry, I just couldn't be impartial there. But these old school attitudes would be encouraged in Martin Johnson's time as England boss, as a direct contrast to England's previous boss Brian Ashton with his oddball creative style. But despite all the distractions, Johnson decided to give Cipriani the starting jersey against the Pacific Islanders in his first game in charge. And it was a mixed bag from the young fly half, as he both sparked England's attack with his usual flair and skills, but he also got charged down and gave a try away, sort of mirroring his season's form up to this point. But I think all in all, he had a decent game, and the English won the contest convincingly. Then it was the first of their big three tests, Australia. This game, Cipriani was in a slightly difficult situation where he was playing a team who were about 3 levels above the English in most departments, and could maybe have been accused of chasing the game too much, with the English eventually losing the game 28-14. Then came the game against the Springboks, which did not go his way, to put it lightly. The Englishmen were completely outclassed really, but Cipriani wasn't able to help the team or himself with pressure on him to perform, and it just wasn't his day. Cipriani had talked about these 2 games against the Wallabies and Springboks as a real low point for him, and after this performance he was dropped to the bench for the final international game of the autumn against the All Blacks. He has also talked about his disappointment that Johnson didn't stick with him through this rough patch of form, and Johnson's decision to quickly drop him before the last game. England without Cipriani was soundly beaten by the All Blacks 32-6 in an all-round pasting. that Cipriani got a 5-minute cameo in where he didn't get to touch the ball. But that didn't stop some pundits claiming after the autumn that Cipriani was being found out at the international level, despite the whole team underperforming. People were talking about Cipriani's struggle to recreate his form from last season. One of those people was current London Irish player and former England international Mike Catt, who publicly said that he didn't think Cipriani deserved an England call-up, as after the international games he struggled and hadn't played well, as well as right after the South Africa game, stating in his article in The Guardian, "This has not been a great few weeks in the boy wonder's career. Cipriani has lost his swagger now. He is missing the arrogance that any good fly-half needs, and is standing far too deep. You can't stand that deep and be a threat in international rugby." He also went on to talk about the frequency of Danny Cipriani being charged down at international level, saying it suggests a lack of spatial awareness and judgment, saying Cipriani shoved his head back into his shell like a cautious turtle, and that he has the potential to be a world-class talent. He also spoke about how he hopes Cipriani can find his form back at his club, but I imagine it was the bits before that might have annoyed Cipriani. Just a guess. Cipriani and Mike Catt also had a non-field clash just after the autumn internationals, when Wasps played London Irish. I wonder if that article was related. A match that Cipriani refused to shake Mike Catt's hand after the game. When asked about why the clash occurred, Mike Catt stated, "Maybe the game's changing. Maybe that's the arrogance of young players. I don't know. What he achieved last season was pretty amazing for a fly-half, and I praised him to the hilt, but he's not playing well at the moment. I have my opinions, but I'll keep them to myself because I don't want to get into any bother." He then goes on to talk about the fact that scraps happen in rugby, but you have a beer with the guy after, and now he understands what Will Greenwood was saying and understood why Josh Lucy knocked him out. He then finished saying, "I wish we could stop talking about the bloke and start giving column inches to some other fly-halves," then complimenting how well Dave Walder, Wasps' other fly-half, was playing in Cipriani's absence. Ooh, scathing. And then Mike Catt and Cipriani never met again and lived happy and fulfilling lives, I think. But it was true that after the autumn internationals, Cipriani couldn't really get a consistent run of form going, and his Wasps side were not performing to their usual high standards. It would also be a frustration for him that it was true that in his absence on international duty, his deputy fly-half Dave Walder had played well and was getting a lot more game time because of it, having Cipriani play second fiddle or be subbed off for a lot more than he would have been used to, which I imagine was quite a shock to him, as up to this point he had known nothing but winning and being the main man. Furthermore, it would make his job of being England's #1 fly-half an even harder task to accomplish. Then when the Six Nations squad was revealed for the 2009 Six Nations Championship, Cipriani found himself in the training squad for the tournament, but not in any of the matchday squads, and after the first few games he was dropped to the Saxon squad, which is the England's second team, which must have been a hard pill to swallow for the young man. I always forget at this point he was a 20-year-old man. That's mental, which I think may explain how he reacted to the situation. The rest of the season turned out a bit like the start for Cipriani, with his usual flashes of excellence obviously showing their face on occasion, but not the same consistent bar-storming performances of the previous season, with Wasps and him only going back to their best towards the end of the season, winning their last 10 games on the bounce. But this run of form wasn't enough for him to get selected for the Lions tour to South Africa, despite the big Wasps connections amongst the selectors, with Ian McGeechan, Warren Gatland and Sean Edwards all being involved in the tour selection, although he was on standby in case one of the two fly-halves were injured whilst on tour. But I think this disappointing season's real kick in the teeth for Cipriani was when it was capped off with him being left out of England's summer tour and instead being selected for the Saxons. This was following rumours around the time that there was a sharp exchange between Danny and some of the coaches, as well as England manager Johnson, although these rumours were sharply denied by the RFU at the time. Cipriani spoke about his England omission, saying, "I can't pretend that I'm not massively disappointed. They have told me to go out and show I can lead a side, and also I need to get some game time." Johnson also spoke about the selection, saying, "I understand the need for balance in life, but we judge players on what they do on the rugby field and also how they interact with the team off it. The world is tempting and they're signing lucrative contracts at a young age. That's fine, but they've got to work for it. It's not just Danny Cipriani. Other guys have potential lifestyle issues." Oof, lifestyle issues, you know? He played in the England Saxons Churchill Cup games, which were interestingly partly coached by Stuart Lancaster. Remember that name? But when he was playing in the Churchill Cup, he found himself not even being first choice. He was instead on the bench for most of the tournament, the selectors preferring Stephen Myler, so he didn't play much part in an underwhelming Churchill Cup campaign for England. Danny Cipriani spoke about his time with the Saxons that year in an interview, saying, "It was a bit of a disappointment going away with the Saxons and being on the bench in the final game, but it was a well-run trip and I learned a lot. It also gave me extra drive when I came back to full training. I've spoken to Brian Smith, who was England's attacking coach at the time, but it's about the first couple games against Quins and Bath. That's my stage. If I play well for Wasps, hopefully I'll be selected for England." But I believe that this England squad selection was a bit of a turning point in Cipriani's mind, as he had gone from potential Lions contender to not even being part of an England squad when the Stars were away. And maybe it was the point where he started to look elsewhere. As the 2009-10 season was about to begin, there was still a bit of unrest at London Wasps, as Cipriani was yet to sign a contract extension, as his deal was due to end at the end of the season. This was because he had only opted to sign a 12-month extension on his previous deal, talks for an extension to continue over the course of the season. Clubs like Stade Francais and Saracens were interested in him at the time, and the young fly-half, who hadn't played for England since the autumn of 2008, was hoping to stay in England at his home club. There were also reports that Cipriani was asking for an offer of around £300,000 a year compared to his current deal, which was around 70,000. But reports say Wasps were only willing to offer around 150,000 to him at the time. There were also reports of Cipriani's frustration at their lack of indication that in the absence of a major salary boost, the club would at least assure him of their continued ambition and willingness to invest in better facilities for the future. I think all of this feels like frustration. On the financial side, when you're not getting picked for England, you're not getting the financial benefits of being an international player. I'm guessing he was asking for Wasps to give him a real financial reason to stay at the club, in a country and environment he probably felt had it in for him. But Cipriani was still chopping at the bit to get back into the England squad. But unfortunately, Cipriani's season at the club was similar to its previous, with his obvious talents being shown at the start of the season with an impressive run of games where he really hit the ground running, but then disaster struck with him being injured for 6 weeks around October of 2009 with a hairline fracture to his right knee, which didn't give him any real chance to make Martin Johnson's squad for the Autumn Internationals that year. With him being out of the picture for a little bit, Dave Warder staked his claim again for the Wasps shirt by taking his opportunities with both hands and made it hard for Cipriani to get back in the team, with the current director of rugby at Wasps, Tony Hanks, talking about playing Cipriani at fullback instead of 10 to accommodate Warder into the team. It completely stalled the contract negotiations that he was having, as they weren't picking him consistently as their number one fly half. Then this run of ill fortune for Cipriani was topped off when it came time for the 2010 Six Nations. Cipriani was not selected in the squad for the tournament. When Cipriani was asked whether Martin Johnson would leave him out of the squad on purpose to make him buck his ideas up slightly, he responded with, "I don't think they've thought about me and said, let's lay the challenge down by not picking him. I don't think they'd do that. They've picked Johnny for their reasons and it's for me to go out and do the best I can. Hopefully it's me who'll be selected when I'm ready." After the Six Nations came to a close, rumours started to surface about complaints from management about Cipriani's behaviour whilst playing for the England Saxons during a trip to Italy. It is allegedly claimed that the 22-year-old had ignored instructions from the team's coaches during a training session and then cheered while watching Wales score a try against England in the Six Nations game, which does make me laugh. I can just imagine him, Wales have scored and him just going, "Way!" He is also said to have made barbed remarks regarding England's manager Martin Johnson whenever the camera panned to him during the TV footage of the game. Then former England international Will Carling revealed that he'd spent 6 weeks with Cipriani and was interested in managing him, with, in his words, the sole purpose of making him England's number one fly half. But after 6 weeks with the young man, he had this to say: "I have spent the last 6 weeks trying to focus Danny, and without laying the blame at anyone's door, the main reason that I've decided not to go ahead is that I do not believe that Danny's focus is on playing for England. That and that alone was my motivation for getting involved with him. It is not about money and certainly not about profile. It was about helping him earn the England number 10 shirt, and rightly or wrongly, I have concluded that his desire to earn the shirt is not as strong as I want it to be and as strong as it needs to be. I sincerely hope that it is not a talent never fulfilled in an England shirt, but I worry that that might be the case. And I just hope that sometime soon Danny focuses on England and the hard work that will be necessary to earn his place in the team." Will Carling also stated that after consulting players and coaches, the consensus around him was that he was a great talent, but with the ability to alienate his teammates. Shortly after that, in February of 2010, it was announced that Cipriani would be leaving Wasps and the country for the Melbourne Rebels on a 2-year deal. Shortly after that, he gave an interview with The Independent with the same man who did a 2-page spread about him 4 years ago, calling him the next big thing. In this interview, it's fair to say that he let out a few of his grievances. "I was the only England fly half considered for a Lion spot. I thought I'd be chosen for England's 2 games with Argentina. Instead they sent me to the Saxons. They said the game time would be good for me. I could have had the metal plate in my ankle taken out and not gone, but I did go and I was a positive influence." He then touched on his relationship with Martin Johnson, saying, "It's to do with making you feel wanted. If it was up to me, I'd be giving players confidence, not knocking them down." He was then asked whether the England coaches would like to give young talent a chance, and he said, "I'm sure Martin Johnson and his coaches would love to put out young talent, but they have to answer to their bosses and win matches, and they pick players who they think will get results. Shane Geraghty was clearly the form fly half in the autumn in the Premiership, and probably Europe, and he played at 12 for England. Stefan Armitage has been the outstanding number 7 in the league this season, but it doesn't always fit the bill for what a coach wants, or what they're trying to do. Ben Foden might have had 20 caps by now, but instead he's got 4. Some people vote Conservative, some people vote Labour. Everyone makes their choice. I'm not saying I know it all. I am absolutely not saying I'm the best player. Martin might not think I fit his mould or his shirt for what he wants or how he wants to play. I feel like in this he's just venting and just speaking for his feelings. Looking back at it, it comes off very emotional. Shortly after this move was announced, Cipriani revealed that he had sought out counselling for depression that he was suffering from at the time. Cipriani continued the rest of the season with his usual flair, but after a lacklustre display at Twickenham against Bath, he was dropped for his last home game against Cardiff in the Amlin Challenge Cup, which after spending your whole career somewhere, must have stung for Cipriani just a little. He came off the bench but was still lost. So in the end it was a bit of an unremarkable end to such an exhilarating ride for Cipriani at Wasps, for now. After the season had ended, he spoke to The Guardian more about his frustrations and also his reasons for leaving. He spoke about how happy he was before his Test debut and that the reason he plays rugby was to play for England. He spoke of regrets about not speaking up in team meetings and addressing the perception that his attitude was poor, but thought it would be better as a young player to keep his head down. He then spoke about how his happiness has just been worn down by all this negativity surrounding him, how he is treated and reported differently to other players, and how he sees his father get upset when he reads all these articles criticising and scrutinising and judging his life, and how there were so many times when it was upsetting and disappointing and frustrating. Journalists who write about you negatively don't understand the damage it can do to the people around you. I don't want to be around it anymore. I've been so happy. So much of the old confidence is back. I've not had any doubts. I can't wait to go to Melbourne. I just think it's going to benefit me in the long run. I don't want this to be a headline, but there were times when I thought about quitting. I just thought, is this worth it? Should I be doing something else? I feel privileged to earn a living from rugby, but with everything I was getting, there were times where it just felt like a job. And it annoys me that happened because this is something I love. He went on to speak about the attitude of the coaches being hurtful and that attitude being draconian, which I think we can all agree is a very big word. He states, it's part of the reason why I'm going. I know people say I'm running away, but it's a chance to escape this cycle of negativity and get my buzz back. A team includes all kinds of personalities. You have to manage them differently. But it got to the point where it felt like everyone had made their minds up about me. Like at the end of last season, we had won the last 10 games and we were playing well, but it felt like I had to produce a miracle performance for anyone in the England camp to say I'd played well. They didn't communicate with me, but I'm not angry because this opportunity would never have come up if things weren't like this with England. Cipriani then spoke about why he chose the Melbourne Rebels, talking about how the other clubs were offering much better deals, but he was thinking, what kind of change will help me enjoy rugby again? His reasons for the move were even doubted by Rod McQueen, the Melbourne Rebels coach, who coached the Wallabies to victory in the 1999 World Cup. Cipriani talked about how Rod had heard some of the stuff in the papers, but after he called him and stated how much he wanted to play in the Super 15, he realised how passionate Cipriani was to move over and become a better player. When asked about getting picked for the World Cup, he states, you never know. I could go out there and play so well I just have to be picked. When I come back after 2 years, I'll only be 24. That's hardly old. And you never know, maybe things will be different then. And then when asked what Martin Johnson made of his move to the Melbourne Rebels, Cipriani quoted Martin saying, he thought it would be good for me. And then when asked, did he make any attempt to make you stay? He simply replied, no. And then it was time to move on. So up to this point, we've seen a young man grow up as the centre of attention. First at home with his mother's main priority, getting her son to be the best and most successful man he could be. Then his sporting life, as he was a boy who seemed to excel in every sport that he played with a creative mindset that seemed to set him apart from his peers, which continued as he got older, captaining England under 16s and then making his debut at Wasps, and excelling even further in his first couple seasons, becoming England's next big thing. But up to that point, nothing had really gone wrong for him while he was the centre of attention. And what we have seen is the ugly side of being the centre of attention, as when things go wrong, you're the first to blame, as you're the first name on their lips, as well as the dark side of being a minor sporting celebrity and the effect that can have on people and how they perceive you, with coaches, the media and your teammates all seeing you through a different light and lens and forming their own opinions of you. Then you have the mental toll of dealing with all that and being a young man not used to having things not go well for you, and now having so much seemingly go wrong. Also the fact that he was used to having his coaches be emotionally invested in him and to take the time to understand him and the way he thinks. But once Brian Ashton wasn't England's main man, he was confronted with someone who didn't have that emotional investment, someone who was old school and had an old school mindset which completely contrasted with Cipriani's in almost every way. Then after the autumn internationals, basically wanting nothing to do with him despite his obvious talents, in addition to the lack of understanding about his injury, it hurt him and he was lashing out constantly, which only seemed to make the situation even harder for him, to the point where he just had to get away from it all. I think Brian Moore in his article at the time put it best when talking about Cipriani having to seek therapy. He stated, "Is it not wrong that a player is placed in a position where he feels he has to seek such advice? Cipriani's advisors have not helped him with their positioning of him as a fashion celebrity marketing vehicle before he established his sporting credentials. It is cruel to overburden a young player with your hopes and unfulfilled desires, because few sportsmen can cope with such a burden. Moreover, England's inability to sustain a coherent attacking strategy is a conundrum of epic proportions and is not the responsibility of Cipriani, nor is it capable of being solved by him alone. Now it seems that the best option for him is to get on with his life elsewhere, with a strict caveat that he avoids the attentions of the media in a new environment. Go and play. Come back a better, wiser player, because though it seems like a lifetime, you will only be 27 by the time the World Cup comes to England. And 5 or 6 years of good rugby either side of that competition would be more than most achieve. Above all, sort yourself out as a man and the rest will take care of itself." And that was the plan. And that's where we're going to leave it for now. But we are by no means done. Join me for part 2, Being Blue.